Okay, so welcome everyone to this short webinar on the growth mindset, how growth mindset links to creating high performance learning cultures. So we've been really passionate about growth mindset as an organization for a while, and certainly with our colleagues in the brain food community, it's been a hot topic for many of us in the learning community to talk about, and is gaining more and more prominence in the world around us. So what I wanted to do is just to spend a little bit of time taking you through kind of some of our insights into growth mindset, and really to think about how our knowledge and understanding of growth mindset can be utilized within our organizations to help build high performing learning cultures. So one of the things that we do know, and some of the research I did behind my book MicroLeadership, was how the world of work is changing, and the fact that we as individuals and leaders are facing into new challenges on a more regular basis. So gone are the days where you learn a trade and then you are able to apply that trade for many years afterwards with little or no change to it. In the modern world, we may learn a particular specialism, but that specialism is constantly morphing and changing, and we need to be able to learn and grow as we go. And our ability to face into fresh challenges without a blueprint to follow is really critical for our success. So this really feeds into the work that Carol Dweck did around mindset, and others have further developed since her original publication. So I'm going to take you through some thoughts around that and how we can really use this information to create high-performing learning cultures and learning teams. And at the end, I've got a special announcement of something really exciting that we're bringing to you today that hopefully will be of interest to you. So what is the growth mindset? Well, Matthew Syed, the author who've written the book Bounce and Black Box Thinking, and his newest book, Rebel Ideas. So a deep thinker in this area, and has worked with Carol Dweck to advance the kind of concept of growth mindset. But what he said in 2015 is growth mindset is the belief that an individual can grow and develop through dedication, hard work, and purposeful practice, and not just rely on given talent. So if you've read any of Matthew's work, you'll know that he was a former Olympic table tennis player and British champion. And through his own story and his own history, yes, he had some abilities, but he really does put his own growth in his sport through to the application of what he learned to be called was the growth mindset, the application of purposeful practice. So he comes from a place of experience, and that's influenced a lot of his writing in this area. So when we look at a growth mindset, it's this ability that we can morph and develop and grow and change our skills and talents to become more effective. But it takes hard work, and it takes effort, and it takes practice, but we are not complete. This view that we are given a modicum of talent when we're born, and we have to kind of grow into that talent and fulfill that talent that's given to us is the antithesis of what growth mindset is about. Actually, growth mindset says that we have the potential to grow into all different skills and abilities and talents if we are willing to dedicate enough effort towards it. So really, we're starting to see this need for us to develop into or develop organizations that harness growth mindset and don't just look for talent. So growth mindset was originally kind of made public by Carol Dweck in her book in 2006, so published a long time ago already. But in her research, particularly with children, she really identified that individuals can be placed on a continuum according to their implicit views of where their ability comes from. And what she recognizes, there is this view of people who have a fixed mindset on one hand, who think that everything is predestined, they have talent and they're very protective of their talent, and their talent dictates how far they can go, to this other group who believe that anything is possible as long as you are willing to apply practice, purposeful practice, and grow your abilities and take on fresh challenges and learn through mistakes, etc. And what Carol Dweck identified through her work in children was these mindsets get formed very early in our childhood. But these mindsets are movable and developable. So the beauty around growth mindset is no matter where you're starting from, even if you start out with a relatively fixed mindset, if you are aware enough and want to, you can grow your mindset, you can change your mindset, and you can adapt it. So it's attitudinal and behavioral rather than set or personality based. So people with a growth mindset love challenges, be intrigued by mistakes, enjoy effort, and keep on learning. That's a quote that comes from Carol Dweck when she talks around the benefits of people adopting the growth mindset. So what we're going to do in the next few minutes is just look into these concepts of fixed mindset and growth mindset. And really what I want to do is to try and help you to kind of identify how these two mindsets show up in the world around us. Because when we start talking to people about growth mindset, it's a little bit like driving a car. Most people believe that they're kind of above average in their ability to drive a car. And of course, that's impossible because you can't have everybody being above average, because the average would be higher, of course. And growth mindset is the same, but from research done by both Dweck and further research from Matthew Side Consulting, they've recognized that 40% of the population have a fixed mindset. Yet when we often ask people about their mindset, they will often say, no, I'm kind of, it's the right thing to say that I've got a growth mindset. So part of what we're looking to do through this webinar is to highlight those areas where some of us will have more fixed views of the world or have more of a fixed mindset, and how that might show up in practical terms. Because what we know through the research done by Dweck and by Side, it's not an either or, it's not a binary conversation. We will all have elements of a fixed mindset at times, and we will all have elements of a growth mindset at times. And it's the relative strength of these two mindsets playing out, and also in different aspects of our life. So in some areas we might demonstrate a highly growth mindset, but in other areas of our life we might be slightly more fixed. So what I'm going to take you through is a number of dimensions which, through some additional research on the back of the work done by Carol Dweck, have been identified about kind of key areas where growth mindset really shows up in the way that we do our work. And these areas, there are lots and lots of areas where growth mindset can show up, but these are the ones that are most indicative and related to our ability to perform in the corporate world. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you now has come from Matthew Side Consulting. We're very pleased to partner with Matthew Side Consulting and to bring to our Brain Food community this insight that's come from our times and relationships with Matthew and his organization. So one of the key areas is approach to learning and growth. So those people who've got more of a fixed mindset will tend to avoid difficult problems and tasks that they've not worked on before. So people with a fixed mindset like certainty. They like to know that they are able to perform, because for many with a fixed mindset, their sense of self comes from their ability to perform at high levels. And if they are then placed into a situation where they have less knowledge or less understanding, that can sometimes be a little bit concerning for them, because it means that they're not, in their own mind, as successful as they have been before. So they may prefer to work on familiar tasks that they know they can do well. If we contrast that with people with a growth mindset, on the other hand, people with a growth mindset like to work on new or difficult problems and tasks that will allow them to learn and develop. So you'll find people with a growth mindset are actively seeking new opportunities to stretch, wanting to face into situations where they perhaps don't know what the right answer is, but they want to learn and grow through it. And they may be willing to invest more effort to improve. So what we find with people, even very talented people who have a fixed mindset, is they aren't willing to invest the time and energy to improve necessarily. They just expect to be able to do something really well. And when it doesn't happen, they can sometimes become disheartened. So this willingness to invest in to improve is really important in the growth mindset. Second area that comes in, very commonly noticed in organizations and individuals, is the use of feedback to learn. So people with a fixed mindset will tend to avoid feedback from others because they have a relatively fixed view of themselves and their abilities. They don't like to seek out necessarily the feedback of others, because in that feedback, there may be some questions around their own ability, which potentially undermines that kind of sense of self and esteem. This may lead them to potentially ignore negative or potentially useful feedback. So the more kind of constructive feedback that we get from others, they typically will ignore. And often they'll ignore this through a very defensive reaction, trying to justify or explain away the reasons why they did something rather than listening to the true meaning. So you'll often find people with a more fixed mindset overly justifying why they do things. And as it says there, may become discouraged or defensive in response to feedback. So that lack of willingness to listen to what people say that could really help them to step forward and improve. When we see people with a growth mindset, they actively seek out feedback. They put themselves into positions where feedback is available, where feedback is readily given. They also create environments where there is a two-way flow of feedback. So that openness to give and receive feedback because they know that it helps them to grow and develop. They will see feedback as a prompt to invest more effort or to change strategies. So when they get feedback that has perhaps not gone so well, rather than getting discouraged or disheartened by this, they take that and say, okay, so I'm learning something here. It's not going as I planned it to. What can I do differently? Or how can I work harder on this aspect to become more effective? And then they'll elicit feedback to see the progress they're making. So they will create this kind of feedback loop that says, actually, as I try out these new techniques or new strategies, what difference is it making? And they'll believe that feedback provides the opportunities to learn. So they will step forward into that feedback, embracing it and seeing it as a way to move forward. So our reaction to feedback can tell us a lot about how much of a growth or a fixed mindset people have and in what different areas. So some people might be really open to feedback around their ability to process a particular task, but less open to feedback around their own behaviors. So again, we might see a growth mindset in terms of learning to do particular skills or tasks, but less open, less growth around or more fixed around behaviors. Just as a few examples that hopefully might ring true with perhaps people who you work with, or maybe for yourself as well. So then we look at the next area to look at is our ability to learn from mistakes, or what happens when things go wrong. So many people with a fixed mindset can view the failure as evidence that they're not good enough. So because I have a relatively fixed view of my talent and I believe I should be able to do things without very much effort, certainly at the more talent end of a fixed mindset, when I end up not doing things the way I hoped, or making a mistake or failing to achieve a certain task, rather than just seeing this as a gap between my current reality and where I need to get to, often people with a fixed mindset will call themselves a failure, will use that language, will be quite destructive in their inner voice towards themselves. And it will give that sense that I'm just not good enough at this sort of stuff. So those with a fixed mindset, typically they might tend to avoid tasks with a higher risk of failure. So they like to stay very much within their comfort zone, very much within the safety zone. And again, you often find this with, again, I keep kind of referencing people with high talent because people with a fixed mindset can be highly talented individuals. It's not that they're lacking talent, but they believe that their talent has a limit to it. And oftentimes they will stay within, even though they're really talented and have lots of ability, they'll stay within a relatively safe area and avoid that high risk of failure because it might diminish them. And of course, this might limit innovation because I'm not willing to push the boundaries or take things to the edges, which I need to do to innovate and to do things well and effectively. So when we look within an organizational context, when you've got people who are afraid of learning from mistakes or afraid of failure, you often find organizations that start to constrict because they limit innovation and the implications of not succeeding at things cause them to diminish, become less of themselves. Those with a growth mindset, on the other hand, embrace challenging tasks where they might not succeed. So people with a growth mindset like to be put into situations and like to choose situations for themselves where they don't know what the answers are, but through doing, they will learn those answers. And they know that first time out, they may not be perfect, but by moving through, embracing the challenge, making mistakes, but willing to kind of pick themselves up, dust themselves off and learn from it, they become better. The key thing that's different around growth mindset in this area as well is this not dwelling on mistakes or setbacks. So you'll often find people with a fixed mindset. One mistake that happened several weeks or months ago could become a recurring kind of weight that drags them down as they move forward, kind of the chain around the ankle, so to speak. Whereas people with a growth mindset typically will acknowledge the mistake or acknowledge the error or the setback, understand what caused it and why it happened, and then move on, but kind of discard the mistake itself. It doesn't leave too deep a scar for them. And they'll look at it as experiences to learn from. And you typically find people with a growth mindset are less worried about other people's opinions of them. So there's a really great sports psychologist called Michael Gervais. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a huge fan of his. And he uses this phrase, fear of other people's opinions, as one of the most destructive thoughts that we all carry around. If we are more worried about what other people think about us than actually our own performance, it can often be a negative impact on our happiness and our well-being. And this is certainly true for people with a fixed mindset. They focus much more on what other people are going to think about them rather than what they're actually learning through the process. And this again can be the reasons why they typically avoid more stretching assignments, because if they don't get it right, what are other people going to think of them? So we see this happening quite a lot in organizations where people are unwilling to take on additional responsibilities, not because they fear they won't be able to do it, but because they fear what other people will think if they fall short. Another area where this shows up is the need to feel smart. So in the fixed mindset, people are concerned about looking smart in front of others. When you've got organizations that are based on status and prestige and intellect in particular, particularly seen in intellectual environments, where knowledge is the currency that gives people power, this sense that I need to have this knowledge or I need to have this wealth of experience is where I draw my sense of worth from. And you'll find people with a fixed mindset tend to have goals around winning positive judgment or avoiding negative judgment. So again, it comes back to this fear of other people's opinions, but they will want to appear to have all the answers. They will want to be the person in the room who is the smartest in that room. So they won't necessarily put themselves into conditions or situations where other people may be brighter or have different perspectives or might challenge their knowledge. People with a growth mindset, on the other hand, tend to have goals around learning and increasing competence. So you'll find when people are developing their personal development plans or talking about their goals, people with a fixed mindset will be, how do I apply what I already know to make sure that I'm performing to a higher standard? Whereas people with a growth mindset will be looking at, what do I not know already and what can I discover or learn as I move forward? And they'll set themselves challenges around how they grow, how they become bigger. So they're open to learning from and working with others. You'll find that people with a fixed mindset typically are a little bit less collaborative because they want to be the person with the most knowledge. People with a growth mindset will typically seek out others they can learn from and embrace the fact that other people are further along the line than they are. Another area where this can have an impact in the workplace is our response to complexity. So how we deal with the ever-changing, ambiguous, often complex, and often volatile environments that we currently work on. So the military have coined a term, VUCA, which we use a lot within our work with clients around this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So how do you cope in these environments? Typically, people with a more fixed mindset are more likely to make rapid judgments and typically are more likely to assign blame. So when things don't go according to plan, rather than exploring the reasons why, they'll make rapid judgments based on a fixed perception of what should have happened. And it's typical that the fingers start pointing at that stage. The other thing that we find with people with a fixed mindset is once they've made that judgment, they are less likely to revise it. So they'll make judgments quickly and then they stick or are fixed in that particular judgment and unlikely to challenge that. In fact, they will use data and evidence to justify their original judgment rather than having new evidence come on board that alters it. People with a growth mindset, on the other hand, typically they'll understand that cause of problems may be very complex. So when something's not gone according to plan, rather than being judgmental, well, actually, what are the different dynamics or factors that are fed into this that enable me to understand why things haven't quite gone to the plan that we already had? So they'll think through the problems and look to explain or understand rather than assign blame. And of course, in this understanding and this awareness that we grow, this is how we develop our ability to learn so we can rectify, make changes, iterate, innovate to ensure that we work our way through this complex environment. And this is an area that we found very particularly relevant in leaders in the modern world, is this ability to respond to complexity and actually have this openness to understanding so I can learn. If anybody's done any of the work around double loop learning from Chris Aguirre, then you'll see that this process, rather than a single loop of judgment and rectifying and the sticking plaster, into deeper understanding and looking at the basis assumptions so we can change from a very fundamental or foundational level so we can improve going forward. Another area where it shows up in the workplace is in this realization of potential. So as we said right at the start, people with a fixed mindset tend to believe that abilities are innate and cannot really be developed. And therefore, they're less likely to pursue personal development. You'll find people who've got this high sense of their own self-worth coming from the belief that they are innately talented and have certain abilities that have been given to them for them to fulfill, typically don't go on a huge amount of personal development and growth because it's for them to fill out the map that's already been provided, as opposed to seeking out and following their own course. So you'll find people with a fixed mindset tend to shy away from personal development. And underlying some of this can be the fear of, well, if I go on something and I'm not as good as I think I am, what's that going to mean for me? Am I going again to feel diminished because I'm not able to perform this particular task at the standard that I need to, or that others might be able to do? Growth mindset, on the other hand, believes that abilities can be developed through effort, so this purposeful practice, and more likely to pursue personal development and development of others. So you'll typically find people with a growth mindset seek out opportunities to grow, hence the name growth mindset, but also encourage others around them to seek out development too. And then final kind of area to look at is this exploration of new ideas or innovation. People with a fixed mindset typically may be more comfortable with the current level of knowledge and skills, so they tend to stay within the framework they've already created and are less likely to explore new and different ideas or different ways of doing things. So typically you'll find people with a fixed mindset more comfortable with the status quo and less open to change. In fact, you'll find people with a fixed mindset quite resistant to change. People with a growth mindset, they have a desire to learn new skills, master new tasks, and understand new things. They'll look for new and different perspectives. So typically you'll find people with a growth mindset will apply their growth mindset and their exploration of new ideas or innovation in various aspects of their life. So when they feel like they've mastered one aspect, they'll take what they've learned from mastering that and apply it into a different set of areas. You'll typically find people who've got high growth mindset in this area may go through many career evolutions as they start to apply what they've learned in one area to a completely new facet that they then try and master again. So you'll find this lifelong learning, willing to shift and change, not being defined by a certain title or a certain role, but looking to apply what they've learned in broader areas. It's a very common thing that we see with people who have got this growth mindset. And then in terms of working together, I mentioned about collaboration earlier. So in the fixed mindset, made them see others as competitors. So typically they'll protect knowledge. Because again, if I make my knowledge aware to others, then they might utilize that and may go on and go beyond me. So you find a quite protectionist approach with people with a fixed mindset, very concerned that other people are stealing their ideas, or actually, if I keep the information myself, then I can be the smartest person in the room that we talked about earlier. If I allow other people in the inside as well, they'll be able to do their own thinking and they won't need me as much. People with a growth mindset are comfortable sharing ideas with colleagues, open to receiving advice from others, and more likely to seek help from others when needed. So again, much more collaborative in their approach. They understand the diversity of thought and the fact that they need help from others. And then we look at change. We mentioned this a couple of times already as well. So people with a fixed mindset typically prefer to work on one thing at a time. And they tend to want to wait for full information before acting. So you'll find people with a fixed mindset are hanging out for the real reasons for any change before they're willing to step into that change. So they typically are resistant in the early stage of change until it's all been mapped out. So that less likely to be kind of your early adopters within the change process. Those are the growth mindset, comfortable working on multiple things at a time, and often quite happy to deal with lots of complex, volatile situations. Happy to make decisions with incomplete information if needed. They may like to have more information, of course, but they're quite happy to make decisions because they understand that by deciding and doing, you've got a chance to learn, whereas not making a decision by the very nature constricts what you can learn from it. Now, try new ideas, even if it doesn't know whether they'll be successful or not. So when we think about growth mindset and its implications for organizations, well, so what? We've learned a lot. And of course, I'm sure you'll sit there listening to this and thinking, okay, you can see where this really does help or impact and hinder organizations. But if we look at this very simple kind of formula around performance, so if we're looking at performance in the areas that are listed, it really comes from having this ability to harness a growth mindset, both as an individual, team, and organizational level, plus having the right type of environment for people's growth mindset to flourish. And we can get those right when we can create the right mindset in individuals and the right environment around those individuals. That's where we lead to high performance. We're going to talk through that a little bit more in just a second. One model that we use a lot is Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, where he looks at some of the reasons why teams fail. And again, if we look at the pyramid, the absence of trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and inattention to results. You can often see that when we look at this pyramid through the lens of a growth mindset, there's a strong correlation to some of the dimensions we've already discussed and how this pyramid kind of shows up. And through some research that Carol Dweck has since done, following the launch of her book in 2006, she's done a lot more consulting into the corporate world and a lot more research in the corporate world. And these are some of the stats that she's identified. So 65% more likely to say the company supports risk-taking when we have a growth mindset. 49% more likely to say that the company fosters innovation. 34% more likely to feel a strong sense of ownership and commitment. And 47% more likely to say that colleagues are trustworthy. So when we start to overlay some of these stats with the 5 dysfunctions, we see the importance of trust, the willingness to have debate and discussion that creates this sense of ownership and commitment, which is the next level up in the triangle. Then the willingness to do what you say you're going to do, to take risks because that you are willing to be accountable for the outcomes. And this obviously leads to performance, or on the top of the triangle, the inattention to results. So we can see these disparate different models or views on team performance and overall performance coming together when we start to lay over the lens of growth mindset. So how do we go about developing a growth mindset? So one thing is it can be developed and it can be grown. But we have to have that belief from the start. So it's again challenging our awareness and our understanding of what mindsets are, and the fact that mindsets can be developed and grown and changed, and they aren't like personality, which if we take the the theory around personality are relatively fixed. So our mindsets can be changed. So the first step in any change, both an individual or an organizational level, is to raise our awareness. How do we understand what's going on with our own mindset? Then it's about identifying purposeful practice. So taking the insight from our awareness, focusing on certain aspects of our mindset, and then putting ourselves into a place where we can purposely practice that different aspect of our mindset. So for instance, we might say, well, we've identified that feedback isn't one of our strongest growth attributes when it comes to our mindset. So we can put ourselves in positions where we seek out more feedback, whether that's by doing a 360 or having an accountability partner, or ways that we can choose to get more feedback and practice our reaction to the feedback. So encourage people to give us that direct feedback, and then think about how do we respond in that moment? What's going on within our mindset? What's our initial reaction when that happens? And how can I change that reaction? How can I adapt to that reaction? And through our reflect and learn process, we can assimilate that information, review what's happened, what's changed, and see the progress and growth in our own mindset as we develop. But it takes commitment towards this purposeful practice in the middle, and the willingness to reflect and learn from it. And not to be disheartened by the fact that it may not be perfect first time. So as we go through, we can help, and again, this is where coaching can be a really strong discipline to help individuals, because through that coaching process, you can put yourself into scenarios and positions where you're encouraged to practice many of these attributes. The other thing around developing a growth mindset is the environment. So we need to have 6 kind of key facets that surround the environment to enable us to develop a growth mindset. So the first of these is belief in potential. To be in an environment where we believe that people's potential matters rather than prestige, that it's not about status. So create an environment where if you're good enough, then you should have no limits to what you can achieve, and to encourage people to step into environments where they can put themselves to the test. An environment of freedom, where people are empowered to make decisions, where authority is devolved to the lowest level possible within the organization, and people are encouraged to step up and make choice and make decisions, and are empowered and have the freedom to do so. An environment that listens to people's opinions and genuinely takes on board, and harnesses commitment from people because they are willing to express themselves and be listened to, but that then engenders that kind of commitment to act and give them the authority to take on actions. They're empowered to do things. An environment of trust, where people know that they are in a place of psychological safety. There's a term that's very commonly used in modern business, so this sense of psychological safety, that knowing that I am trusted, that I am valued, that I'm appreciated, and knowing that if something doesn't quite go according to plan, it's not going to be the finger pointing at me, but will help me and support me to learn through it. An environment of innovation, where we are looking to push the boundaries, where we're not set in our way, where we challenge the status quo and look for different ways of working and doing things. And then finally, an environment where we foster calculated risks, that we want to push the envelope, where we're not reckless, but we are willing to take educated and calculated risks to grow our organization or grow ourselves individually. And again, linked into this, knowing that I'm in an environment where if things don't go according to plan, I can learn from it and I can grow through it rather than be diminished or feel that I'm being blamed for it. So there's some insight into the growth mindset. I just want to very quickly take you through a new tool that's available and that's on the market now, which has been specifically designed to enable us to effectively measure and evaluate growth mindset at both both an individual, a team, and an organizational level. So the Mindset Advantage tool has been developed by Matthew Syed Consulting, and we're bringing it to you through an awareness today to look at how this might help and enhance your organization. So the tool is the only commercially available tool that reliably measures growth mindset. So the Matthew Syed business has been working with Carol Dweck, and have done secondary research around the whole concept of growth mindset to bring together a tool that reliably and accurately measures people's growth mindset around 9 different dimensions. It looks at 3 areas on an individual level. So it looks at your resilience mindset, it looks at your learning mindset, and your innovation mindset. And under those 3 headings, there are 3 subcategories, so 9 dimensions in total. And the tool has just been passed through the British Psychological Society and has been validated for its viability and reliability in what it proves out. And as I said, it operates at an individual, team and organizational level. So on an individual level, you get a personal report that shows how well you score on the 9 dimensions around the growth mindset. And because it measures you on all of those 9 dimensions, and it doesn't just take this view that you are either a fixed or a growth-minded individual, but shows how you are growth-minded and how you may be more fixed in your mindset, it enables you to have some real clarity and awareness about the specific areas that you may need to work on to improve on an individual basis. When you aggregate that up to the team level, we then start to see how the team overall starts to perform on these 9 dimensions of growth mindset. And again, it starts to identify specifically within the team what are some of the environmental factors that are supporting the team to really perform, and what is holding the team back potentially when it comes to the mindset of the individuals. So when you start to aggregate up into that team element, you can really dig into how well the team is performing, both in relation to the other 9 dimensions, or the other 8 dimensions, should I say, but also versus the benchmark. So how well does our team perform against our norm group? And the tool has got a norm group of around 3,500 individuals. So quite a robust norm group that it measures against to see how well you're performing against the norm population. And then we can take it up to the organizational level. So when you've got a number of sub-teams and a number of individuals who form into an organization, we can really start identifying how well the organization creates the environment around the growth mindset. So I mentioned earlier 6 facets. Those 6 facets are measured through the tool itself and will give you real actionable insight into what's happening within the organization that may be supporting the development of your growth mindset or could be hindering it. And again, this gives you some really specific, very clear data that you can use to build into a development plan for your organization. So how Mindset Advantage can help you? As I say, it provides clear, actionable insight at an individual, team and organization level, measures how you demonstrated the growth mindset, again, at individual, team and organization level. It focuses on attitudes, beliefs and behaviors. And because all of those elements are changeable, it gives you real insight that will identify how you can change and develop your mindset. And as it says there, helps create change to achieve results, not through adapting. So when we look at personality, often we're talking about having to adapt our personality to meet and connect with others. If we take something like insights, for instance, whereas this model is about actually how do we create foundational change to our beliefs and our attitudes that changes our results. So a much more dynamic approach than many personality tests offer. It operates simultaneously at all 3 levels. So from the one report, we get outputs at the 3 different levels and enables us to readily compare how individuals, teams and organizational results show up, which gives us the opportunity to drive measurable results. So by picking apart the actual reports themselves, looking at the insight and the data, we can then work with your organization to help you to really put a plan in place to how you go on and develop your mindsets in this area. So here's just a few quotes from people who've been working with the growth mindset, Mindset Advantage tool, and just some of the impacts. So reducing errors by 77%, improving quality and productivity, that's saved hundreds of thousands of pounds, making tangible as our culture, So it's helping to attract and retain the right people because they're creating the culture that people want to be part of. Again, changing our culture, seeing systemic changes that will help to increase agility and further improve business performance. So a few very quick examples there from different organizations who've been working with Mindset Advantage and how it's helped them change the way that they're operating in their businesses. So if you'd like to find out more, you can book your demo through our team, and you can visit our website to find out more about the tool itself, and we'd be happy to share more information on how Mindset Advantage could potentially help your organization. So that's brought me to the end of our webinar. I will go over to the chat and have a look if there's any questions that have come through. So please feel free to ask any questions if you have, and I will see if anything's come through on the chat. So if you have got any questions about anything that I've shared so far today, then please feel free to ask questions via the chat, which I'm just looking at the moment. So feel free to send any questions you've got over. I'll also look at the question element as well. So I've got no questions come through yet, and I've got nothing on the chat. So I will stay on the line for a while longer. So if anybody wants to ask any questions or make any comments about anything they've heard, or to share any opinions or thoughts, then please do use the chat function now to take us or ask anything that you might have some help with. Thanks, Jen. That's very kind of you. Nice comment. Thank you. So I'll stay on the line, see if anybody has any specific questions that they'd like to ask about anything to do with the growth mindset, any of the information I've taken you through, or indeed if you'd like to know more about the Mindset Advantage tool. So I can see a few people have dropped off the line, a few people still on, so no problem. Thank you, Julia. Great to have that comment. Thank you very much. So say if there's anybody got any other questions, then please feel free to add. Thanks, Renata. That's you're very welcome. Great to have you on the call. Thanks, Barton. Appreciate your comment. Great to have you on the call as well.